that you guys mistreated her.
How mistreated?
Well, that you called her names and you threatened to throw her out and make her homeless.
I help you guys because you need all the help. But every time that I want to save, it's not even enough for me to get the visa. I cannot save enough years. It's so hard for me.
You could hear the air leave the room the moment Molly looked Sheena's father in the eye and asked, point blank, if he'd been taking every penny Sheena earned and threatening to throw her out if she didn't hand it over. The table, set for what was supposed to be a warm family dinner, suddenly felt like a courtroom, and every fork froze mid-air. Sheena's dad blinked, stunned, his face a mix of confusion and hurt, while Sheena's sister looked from Molly to Sheena, searching for some kind of explanation that would make this accusation make sense. For a split second, nobody spoke, and the only sound was the clink of a spoon against a plate, echoing louder than any words. Sheena's eyes darted to Forrest, desperate for backup, but he was staring at the table, jaw clenched, clearly fighting his own battle between loyalty and doubt. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward, until Sheena's mother finally managed a shaky, "What?" as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. That's when the cracks in Sheena's story started to show, and you could almost see the years of carefully constructed explanations begin to crumble right there in front of everyone. But how did it come to this? How did a couple from the States end up halfway across the world, sitting in a beautiful Filipino home, grilling their future in-laws about money and abuse? It started with whispers, late-night phone calls, and a growing sense that something wasn't adding up. Forrest had always wanted to believe Sheena, but every time she talked about her family, the stories got darker, the details more dramatic, and the stakes higher. Sheena painted a picture of parents who kept her trapped, took her wages, and threatened her with homelessness if she didn't comply. Molly, fiercely protective of her son, listened to these stories with growing alarm, her skepticism turning into a mission to get to the truth. She watched as Forrest sent money, worried as Sheena's explanations shifted, and finally decided she needed to see for herself what was really going on. That's how they ended up here, thousands of miles from home, sitting across from the people Sheena had described as villains, only to find themselves surrounded by warmth, hospitality, and a house that looked nothing like the desperate situation they'd been told about. Now, with the confrontation out in the open, the emotional fallout was immediate and raw. Sheena's father looked wounded, his pride stung by the suggestion that he'd ever mistreated his daughter. Her mother's hands shook as she tried to process the accusation, and her sister's eyes filled with tears, the betrayal cutting deeper than anyone expected. Sheena, caught in the middle, seemed to shrink in her seat, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to explain, but the words tangled and fell flat. Forrest, for his part, looked like he'd aged 10 years and 10 minutes, the weight of doubt pressing down on him as he replayed every conversation, every wire transfer, every moment he'd chosen to trust Sheena over his own instincts. Molly, meanwhile, sat back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression a mix of vindication and regret, as if she'd hoped to be proven wrong, but now felt the burden of being right. The tension in the room was electric, every glance loaded with questions nobody wanted to ask out loud. Was Sheena lying to protect herself, or was there a truth buried somewhere in the mess of accusations and denials? Could Forrest trust anything he'd been told, or was the foundation of his relationship built on sand? And what would happen next, now that the secret was out and there was no way to put it back in the box? If you think this dinner is about to calm down, you're in for a shock, because the next move will leave everyone questioning who they can trust and who's been playing a game all along. Forrest stepped out of the car first, his shoes crunching on the gravel, eyes scanning for the poverty and chaos he'd been warned about. Instead, he found himself staring at a house that looked like it belonged in a glossy travel magazine, fresh paint, tidy garden, a pool glinting in the sun, and not a single sign of the hardship Sheena had described for years. Molly followed, her guard up, lips pressed tight, expecting to see peeling walls and desperation, but what greeted her was a front porch lined with potted orchids and a breeze that smelled like jasmine and home-cooked food. Sheena's family stood waiting, smiles wide, arms open, and for a moment, the tension in Molly's chest loosened. just a little, as she took in the scene. The front door swung open, and the cool air inside carried the scent of garlic and simmering broth, the kind of smell that makes you feel welcome even when you're a stranger. Inside, the living room was spotless, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, family photos lining the walls, and a table set with more food than Molly had seen at some weddings. Sheena's mother pressed a glass of calamansi juice into her hand, her father offered a seat, and her sister fussed over the guests, making sure everyone was comfortable. Forrest tried to hide his surprise, but his eyes kept darting from the polished floors to the framed diplomas on the wall, each detail chipping away at the image he'd built in his mind. Molly, meanwhile, kept her purse clutched tight, her senses on high alert, searching for any sign that this was all a front, a carefully staged performance meant to fool them. She watched the way Sheena's parents moved, the easy laughter, the gentle teasing, and felt her certainty start to slip. Was it possible she'd been wrong? Or was this family simply better at hiding their secrets than she'd expected? The confusion gnawed at her, every act of kindness making her more suspicious, not less. Sheena's mother insisted she try the lumpia, her father poured her a drink, and her sister asked about life in America, all with a warmth that felt genuine, but also, to Molly, almost too perfect. She replayed every story Sheena had told, every tearful phone call, every plea for help, and tried to reconcile it with the scene in front of her. Was Sheena a master manipulator? Or was there something she was missing? Forrest caught her eye across the table, his own doubts written all over his face, and for the first time, Molly wondered if they'd both been chasing shadows, if the truth was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. Still, she refused to let her guard down. Years of suspicion don't vanish in a single afternoon, no matter how good the food or how warm the smiles. Molly kept her questions sharp, her tone polite but probing, determined to find the cracks in the facade. She watched for nervous glances, for stories that didn't add up, for any hint that the hospitality was a mask. But as the afternoon wore on, the only thing she found was her own uncertainty growing. A nagging sense that the answer she'd come for might not be as clear-cut as she'd hoped. If you think Molly's about to drop her suspicions and join the family photo, think again, because the next round of questions is about to turn this perfect afternoon into a pressure cooker, and nobody's getting out without breaking a sweat. The table was set with a feast that could have fed a small army, every dish a labor of love. But nobody seemed hungry. Plates of adobo, pancit, and fresh mango slices sat untouched as Molly's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, every nervous twitch. Sheena's mother tried to keep the conversation light, asking about the flight and American weather, but Molly's answers were clipped, her focus razor sharp. Forrest shifted in his seat, glancing at Sheena, who was picking at her food, her hands trembling just enough for Molly to notice. The air was thick with anticipation, every laugh a little too forced, every smile a little too tight, as if everyone at the table knew what was coming, but hoped, somehow, to delay it just a few minutes longer. Molly waited until the plates had been passed around, until the first round of small talk had fizzled out, and then she leaned forward, elbows on the table, her voice calm but cold. She asked Sheena's father if he was comfortable with Sheena moving to America, if he'd ever tried to stop her, if he'd ever needed her money to keep the family afloat. The questions landed like stones in a pond, sending ripples of confusion across the table. Sheena's father looked stunned, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, while her mother's eyes darted to Sheena, searching for some clue about what was happening. Sheena's sister set her glass down with a shaky hand, her smile fading as she realized this wasn't a friendly chat, it was an interrogation. Sheena's anxiety was impossible to miss. She kept her head down, her voice barely audible when she tried to answer, her words stumbling over each other as she insisted she'd only ever wanted to help. Forrest watched her, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming on the table, caught between wanting to defend her and needing to hear the truth for himself. Molly pressed on, her questions growing sharper, her tone more pointed, as she asked about the money, how much, how often, and whether Sheena had ever been threatened or made to feel unsafe. Each answer seemed to raise more questions, and the tension in the room ratcheted up with every passing second. Sheena's family looked more bewildered with each accusation, their shock turning to hurt as they realized the depth of the suspicion aimed at them. Her father's voice shook as he denied ever taking money by force. Her mother's hands twisted in her lap, and her sister's eyes filled with tears. The warmth that had filled the house earlier was gone, replaced by a chill that settled over the table, making every word feel heavier. Sheena's face was pale, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and Forrest's discomfort was written all over him. His faith in Sheena visibly wavering as the questions kept coming. Molly didn't let up, her determination to get answers outweighing any desire to keep the peace. She pushed for specifics, for receipts, for any detail that would confirm or deny the stories she'd been told. The family's confusion only seemed to fuel her resolve, and the dinner that was supposed to bring everyone together now felt like a trial, with Sheena caught in the middle, unable to escape the spotlight. If you think the truth is about to come out clean and simple, you're in for a surprise, because the next revelation will turn the whole table upside down and force everyone to question what they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and the price of trust. Sheena's voice wavered as she tried to answer Molly's questions, but every word seemed to dig her deeper. The more she spoke, the more the details slipped out of her control. She'd once told Forrest that her parents demanded every paycheck, that she was left with nothing but scraps, that she feared being thrown out if she didn't comply. Now, sitting in a home filled with laughter and family photos, surrounded by people who looked at her with genuine concern, those stories started to sound less like cries for help and more like a script she couldn't keep straight. Molly pressed for dates, for amounts, for any proof that Sheena's money had been taken against her will, but Sheena's answers grew vague, her explanations tangled. She said she'd sent money to help with bills, but then insisted she'd never had enough to save for herself. She claimed her parents threatened her, but her father's confusion was so raw, so real, that even Forrest started to doubt what he'd believed for so long. The flashbacks played out in Forrest's mind. Every late-night call where Sheena cried about her family, every time she'd said she was trapped, every moment he'd felt like her only lifeline. He remembered wiring money, feeling like a hero, thinking he was saving her from a nightmare. Now, watching Sheena crumble under the weight of her own words, he felt a different kind of helplessness, one that came from realizing he might have been played, or at least kept in the dark, for years. Sheena's mother wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she asked why their daughter would say such things, her pain cutting through the room. Her father shook his head, repeating that the money was always a loan, never a demand, and that Sheena could have it back whenever she needed. Her sister looked at Sheena with a mix of worry and disbelief, as if she was seeing her for the first time. Sheena's tears finally spilled over, her hands shaking as she tried to explain herself. She said she was overwhelmed, that she wanted to help, that she never meant to hurt anyone, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. Forrest's frustration boiled over, his voice tight as he asked why she hadn't told him the truth from the start. He wanted to believe her, but every answer seemed to raise more questions. Every apology felt like another layer of the story peeling away. Molly watched it all, her suspicion now mixed with something like pity, as if she realized that the person she'd come to expose was already falling apart. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the reality of Sheena's lies settled over everyone. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, and in that moment, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. If you think this family has reached their breaking point, hold on, because the next confession is about to push them even further, and the fallout will leave scars that no apology can heal. Sheena's hands twisted in her lap as she finally let the truth slip out, her voice barely more than a whisper, but every word landing with the weight of years. She admitted she'd been sending money home not because her parents demanded it, but because she saw how hard they worked and how little they had left at the end of each month. She said she wanted to help, to be the daughter who could lift some of the burden, but every time she tried to save for herself, something came up. A medical bill, a broken appliance, a school fee for her sister. The money she'd meant to put aside for her visa always seemed to vanish, and the guilt of not being able to move forward with Forrest grew heavier with every passing month. Sheena's eyes flicked to Forrest, her voice cracking as she admitted she was terrified he'd leave her if he knew how little she had. How stuck she felt, how much she still owed her family. She said she never meant to paint her parents as villains, but the lies started small and grew until she couldn't see a way out. The room was silent, everyone processing the confession in their own way. Forrest's face softened, but the hurt lingered in his eyes, the sting of betrayal mixing with a new understanding of just how trapped Sheena must have felt. Molly's arms dropped from their defensive cross, her expression shifting from suspicion to something closer to empathy, though her guard was still up. Sheena's parents looked at their daughter, not with anger, but with a sadness that came from realizing how much she'd been carrying alone. The cost of secrets was written on every face at the table, trust shattered, relationships strained, and a family forced to confront the gap between what they thought they knew and what was real. Why do people lie to the ones they love? Sometimes it's fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of disappointing them, fear of being seen as weak or needy. Sometimes it's pride, or shame, or the simple hope that if you can keep the truth hidden a little longer, things might get better on their own. For Sheena, it was all of these at once, a tangled knot of good intentions and bad decisions. She wanted to be the perfect daughter, the perfect partner, the one who could make everyone happy. But the pressure crushed her until the only way out seemed to be a story that wasn't quite true. It's easy to judge from the outside, to call her a liar and move on, but sitting at that table, watching her break down, it was impossible not to feel a flicker of sympathy for someone who tried so hard to hold everything together and ended up losing control. Still, the question hung in the air. Was Sheena a villain, spinning tales to get what she wanted, or was she a victim of her own circumstances, caught between two worlds and desperate not to lose either one? Forrest looked at her, torn between anger and compassion, while Molly weighed every word, trying to decide if forgiveness was possible or if the damage was too deep. Sheena's parents, for their part, seemed more worried about their daughter's pain than their own reputations, their love for her shining through the hurt. If you think this confession is the end of the story, you're about to see how the fallout from one secret can ripple through every relationship in the room, testing loyalties and forcing everyone to choose what matters most. Molly sat back, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the lines on her face deeper than before. She'd come here ready for a fight, convinced she'd find villains hiding behind polite smiles, but now she was staring at a family that looked more broken than dangerous. The trust she'd once had in Sheena was gone, replaced by a wariness that wouldn't fade overnight, but beneath the anger, there was a flicker of something softer. A reluctant understanding of how fear and pressure can twist even the best intentions. Molly's voice was quieter now, less sharp, as she told Sheena she was disappointed, that lies always come out in the end, and that trust, once lost, is hard to rebuild. But she didn't yell, didn't storm out, and for the first time since she'd landed in the Philippines, she seemed to see Sheena not as an enemy, but as someone who'd made a mess and was finally trying to clean it up. Forrest's emotions were a storm behind his eyes. He wanted to reach for Sheena, to tell her it would be okay, but the sting of betrayal kept him rooted in his chair. He remembered every time he'd defended her, every argument with his mother, every dollar sent overseas, and now he wondered if he'd been blind or simply too hopeful. Still, as he watched Sheena cry, he couldn't help but feel the pull of empathy, the urge to protect her from the fallout of her own choices. He told her he needed time, that he still cared, but he couldn't pretend nothing had changed. The disappointment was real, but so was the love, and the two feelings tangled together, leaving him more confused than ever. Across the table, Sheena's family sat in stunned silence, the pain etched into their faces. Her father spoke first, his voice thick with emotion, saying he'd never wanted Sheena to feel trapped or alone, that every peso she'd sent was meant to be a loan, not a demand. Her mother wiped her eyes, insisting they'd always tried to support Sheena's dreams, even if it meant going without. Her sister looked at Sheena with a mix of hurt and worry, asking why she hadn't trusted them enough to tell the truth. For them, the shock wasn't just about the lies, but about the realization that their daughter had felt so desperate, so isolated, that she'd chosen to carry this burden alone. The confusion was as deep as the pain, and the family's sense of unity felt shaken, but not destroyed. The room was heavy with everything left unsaid, the silence broken only by the occasional sniffle or the scrape of a chair. Everyone was searching for a way forward, but the path was anything but clear. If you think forgiveness is coming easily, think again, because the next decision will force everyone to confront what they're willing to risk for a second chance. And not everyone will be ready to take that leap. Forrest cleared his throat, the words sticking for a moment before he finally managed to speak, his voice steady but strained. He looked at Sheena's father, then at Sheena, and asked if the money Sheena had sent over the years could be returned, at least enough for her to finally apply for her visa. The question hung in the air, heavy and awkward, as if someone had flipped the script and now the family was on trial. Sheena's father blinked, caught off guard, and glanced at his wife, searching for the right words. He explained that the money had always been treated as a loan, that they'd never intended to keep it from Sheena, but he admitted it would take time to gather the amount, since it had gone to bills, repairs, and school fees. Her mother nodded, her voice gentle but honest, saying they would do what they could, but it wouldn't be immediate. The practical reality of money, how it moves, how it disappears, how it ties people together and pulls them apart, suddenly felt more real than any accusation or apology. Sheena sat frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes darting between Forrest and her parents. She'd never imagined it would come to this. Her boyfriend asking her family for repayment in front of everyone. The private mess of her finances now laid bare for all to see. Forrest's request wasn't cruel, but it was blunt, and it forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable truth that love and money are rarely simple, especially when trust has been broken. The family's confusion was clear. They wanted to help, but they also felt blindsided, unsure how to fix something that had taken years to unravel. Her sister spoke up, promising they'd look at their finances and figure out a plan, but the uncertainty lingered, a reminder that some wounds take more than words to heal. The exhaustion in the room was palpable. Everyone slumped in their chairs, drained by the emotional roller coaster of the past few hours. Yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a strange sense of relief, as if the worst had finally been said and there was nothing left to hide. Secrets that had festered for years were now out in the open, and while the pain was fresh, there was also a freedom in knowing that nobody had to pretend anymore. The masks were off, and for the first time, everyone could see each other clearly. Flaws and all. If you think this family is ready to move on, don't blink, because the next choice will test whether honesty can build a new foundation or if the cracks are too deep to ever fully repair. The house was quieter now, the echoes of confrontation fading into a heavy, uncertain calm. Plates had been cleared, the last of the food packed away, but nobody felt like celebrating. Sheena sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tight, eyes fixed on the floor, as if searching for answers in the pattern of the tiles. Forrest hovered nearby, arms crossed, his gaze flickering between Sheena and the door, as if he wasn't sure whether to stay or go. Molly lingered in the kitchen, her voice low as she spoke with Sheena's mother, the two women sharing a look that was equal parts sympathy and suspicion. The air was thick with everything left unsaid, every apology that hadn't quite landed, every promise that still felt fragile. Trust, once broken, doesn't snap back into place. It lingers in the awkward silences, the careful way Forrest now asks questions, the way Sheena hesitates before answering, afraid that even the truth might not be enough. Molly's skepticism hasn't faded, if anything, it's sharpened, her instincts on high alert for any sign that Sheena might slip back into old habits. She watches every interaction, every glance, every word, as if waiting for the next secret to drop. The family tries to move forward, but the tension is always there. A reminder that forgiveness is a process, not a single moment. Sheena feels the weight of her choices every time she looks at Forrest. She wonders if he'll ever see her the same way again, if the love they built can survive the cracks that have formed. She wants to believe it's possible, that honesty and time will heal what's been broken, but doubt creeps in at the edges, whispering that some things can't be fixed. Forrest, for his part, is torn between hope and caution. He remembers the girl he fell in love with, the laughter they shared, the dreams they planned. But now, every memory is shadowed by questions. Can he trust her again? Can he trust himself to know the difference between truth and wishful thinking? Molly's presence is a constant reminder of the stakes. She's seen too much, heard too many stories, to let her guard down now. She wants to protect her son, to make sure he doesn't get hurt again, but she also sees the pain in Sheena's eyes, the genuine regret, the longing for a second chance. It's not easy to let go of suspicion, not when the wounds are still fresh, but even Molly can't deny the small signs of change. The way Sheena owns her mistakes, the way Forrest listens instead of accusing, the way the family sits together, even if it's in silence. The question that hangs over everything is simple but impossible to answer. Will Sheena ever be believed again? Every conversation is a test, every gesture a chance to prove herself, but trust is slow to return. The seeds of doubt planted by years of half-truths and omissions don't disappear overnight. Sheena knows she has to earn her place back, not just with Forrest, but with his family, with her own parents, and maybe most of all, with herself. The road ahead is long, and every step feels uncertain, but for the first time, she's willing to walk it without hiding. If you think the dust has settled, don't look away, because the next move could change everything. The smallest decision, the next honest conversation, or the next slip could tip the balance for good. The story isn't finished, and the fallout from tonight will echo long after the lights go out. The night was winding down, but the tension in the air hadn't faded. Forrest stood up first, pushing his chair back with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire evening. He looked at Sheena, his eyes softer now, but still guarded, and for a moment it seemed like he might walk away, leave the mess behind, and start over somewhere else. But instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table toward Sheena's father. Inside was a copy of every money transfer he'd ever sent, every dollar that had crossed oceans in the name of love and trust. Forrest's voice was steady as he explained that he wasn't asking for repayment out of anger, but because he wanted Sheena to have a real chance at a future, one where she could stand on her own without secrets or debts holding her back. The gesture was unexpected, a mix of confrontation and compassion, and it left everyone at the table stunned, unsure whether to feel grateful or exposed. Sheena's father opened the envelope, his hands trembling, and as he looked through the records, his face changed. He turned to Sheena, his voice thick with emotion, and admitted that there was something he hadn't told her. Years ago, when Sheena first started sending money, he'd put a small amount aside each month, hoping to surprise her one day with a gift, a nest egg for her future, a way to thank her for all she'd done for the family. He'd never mentioned it, afraid it would make her feel guilty or obligated, but now, with everything out in the open, he realized it was time to come clean. He promised to give Sheena the savings, enough to help with her visa, enough to show her that her sacrifices hadn't gone unnoticed. The revelation hit Sheena like a wave, her tears returning, but this time they were mixed with relief and gratitude, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Molly watched the exchange, her skepticism flickering as she saw the genuine emotion on both sides. She still had her doubts, still wondered if forgiveness was possible, but for the first time she allowed herself to hope that the family could move forward, that the wounds might heal with time and effort. Sheena's mother reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand, and whispered that she was proud of her, that she'd always believed in her, even when things got hard. The moment was quiet, but it carried the weight of years, a small act of forgiveness that spoke louder than any apology. But just as it seemed like the night might end on a note of reconciliation, a new question surfaced, one that nobody had expected. Forrest, still holding on to his own doubts, asked Sheena if there was anything else she hadn't told him, any other secrets, any other truths waiting to come out. The room went silent again, everyone holding their breath, waiting for the answer. Sheena hesitated, her eyes darting to her parents, then back to Forrest. She admitted there was one more thing, something she'd been afraid to say, something that could change everything once again. She confessed that she'd been offered a job in another city, a chance to start fresh, but she hadn't told Forrest because she was scared it would mean the end of their relationship. The news landed like a bomb, throwing the future into question all over again. Forrest's reaction was a mix of shock and admiration. He was hurt that Sheena hadn't trusted him with the truth, but he also saw the courage it took for her to finally admit it. He told her that he wanted her to take the job, to chase her dreams, and that if their relationship was meant to last, it would survive the distance. The moment was bittersweet, a reminder that love isn't always enough to fix what's broken, but it can be strong enough to let someone go. Molly, for her part, nodded in approval, her respect for Sheena growing as she watched her take control of her own story. The family sat together, the air lighter now, but the questions still swirling. Would Sheena and Forrest make it through the next challenge? Or would the distance prove too much? Would the family find a way to rebuild the trust that had been lost? Or would the scars linger, a reminder of how fragile relationships can be? The answers weren't clear, but for the first time, everyone seemed willing to face them together, to move forward with honesty and hope. As the night drew to a close, Sheena stood up, her shoulders straighter, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. She thanked her family for their support, thanked Forrest for his patience, and promised to do better, to be better, to never let fear or pride get in the way of the truth again. The promise hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting everyone in the room, a sign that healing was possible, even after so much pain. If you think this is the last twist in Sheena and Forrest's story, you're in for a surprise, because the next chapter is already taking shape. There are new secrets waiting to be revealed, new challenges on the horizon, and the drama is far from over. So if you want to see what happens when old wounds meet new beginnings, when forgiveness is tested, and love is put on the line, make sure you don't miss what's coming next on Reality Sport. The story isn't finished, it's only getting started.